Greetings, children. This is the second part of the lesson Silk Road. It is for class 11 CBSE students. If you don't watch the first part, I have given the link in the description box. Go watch and come back. It is better for you to understand this lesson completely. In the first part, we have dealt with around 4 pages. That part is very important. Let us check what are the part that we have covered already. A quick look at the 4 pages. Then we can start the second part. Let us move. So Middleton, his acquaintance Daniel, and the taxi driver Satan started their journey from Ravu, and Lamo, the Tibetan girl, gave him a present of a sheepskin coat. Then Satan told them that he knew a shortcut to get off Changtang. The only difficulty they may face there is the fall of snow. They see so many things there during their journey. They saw a herd of wild ass, then the mastiff black huge dog in front of the tents of the nomads. Then they met with a swathe of white stuff, the snow that blocked their way forward. It was at the height of 5,210 meters. Then they reached at Cane of Rocks. They took a roundabout as a customary. Then they came to a salt lake. They could see lot of salt flats there. By afternoon, they reached a town named Hor. There, Daniel, he got a truck and said farewell to Middleton and Satan and went away in his own way. Today's section starting from here, but I had to wait. Satan told me to go and drink some tea in Horse Only Cafe, which, like all other buildings in town, was constructed from badly painted concrete and had 3 broken windows. Satan wanted to spend a little time with his tire puncturing. He wanted to rectify the 2 punctures he had met earlier. So he directed Middleton to go to the only one cafe in the town and take a coffee. And this cafe is something like the other buildings in the town. It was constructed from badly painted concrete, and the building had 3 broken windows. The good view of the lake through one of them helped it to compensate for the draft. But he was satisfied. Middleton was satisfied sitting inside the cafe because one of those 3 windows gave him a good view of the lake, Manasarovar. And that view, he thought, a compensation for the draft. Draft here means the cold burst of wind that coming through the window. And the word draft is pronounced exactly like draft. Come to the next paragraph. I was served by a Chinese youth in military uniform. So the man who serves coffee in the Hor coffee shop looks like a military man. He is in his military uniform, a Chinese military man who spread the grease around on the table with a filthy rag before bringing me a glass and a thermos of tea. This man in the Chinese military uniform. He spread the grease that was on the top of the table with a filthy rag, a filthy cloth, in the way of wiping out or cleaning it. Actually, what he did was, in the name of cleaning, he spread the grease all around there. Then he went and brought a glass and thermos of tea and put before me. Half an hour later, Satan relieved me from my solitary confinement. He spent around half an hour in the coffee shop. Then came Satan, and his coming that really relieved him from his solitary confinement. Solitary confinement here means sitting alone. In reality, solitary confinement is like putting a person in a single cell prison, solitary imprisonment. But here, the sense of solitary confinement is from his solitudinous. And we drove past a lot more rocks, rubbish, westwards, out of town towards Mount Kailash. Anyhow, they started their journey and they passed many rocks, rubbish, they went westwards. They passed the town and they are moving towards Mount Kailash. Next paragraph. My experience in Hor came as a stark contrast. Stark here means a complete, extreme contrast, extreme opposite of what he had heard about this town. To account, I had read of earlier travelers' first encounters with Lake Manasarovar. So he had certain reading experiences about this town of Hor in the bank of the holy river, the holy lake of Manasarovar. Ekai Kawaguchi, a Japanese monk who had arrived there in 1900, was so moved by the sanctity of the lake. He had read from Ekai Kawaguchi, a Japanese monk's description of Hor. In the description that Kawaguchi, he was really moved by watching the sanctity, the purity, the holiness of the lake, that he burst into tears. He expressed in his travel experience like this. He burst into tears. Who burst into tears here? The Japanese monk, Ekai Kawaguchi. When he saw the sanctity of the Manasarovar, he burst into tears. This knowledge he had in his mind because he had read it from his description, from the description of the Japanese monk. When he came into reality, it was a stark contrast for him. A couple of years later, the hallowed waters had a similar effect on Sen Hedin, a Swede who was not prone to sentimental outburst. The same he had heard about another traveler, Sen Hedin, a Swedish man. Even though he was not prone to sentimental outburst, his description of the Manasarovar and the town really attracted Middleton. Because of all these, he wanted to go and watch this place. He wanted to experience that sanctity from the original place. Come to the next paragraph. It was dark by the time we finally left Eggen, and after 10:30 p.m., we drew up outside a guest house in Darchen for what turned out to be another troubled night. At around 10:30 in the same day, they drew up. Drew up here means the past form of draw up. Came to a halt after driving somewhere. That is, drew up. They drew up outside a guest house in Darchen. They reached the town of Darchen. And for what turned out to be another troubled night, his stay at Darchen became a troubled one for him. Kicking around in the open air rubbish dump that passed for the town of Hor had set off my cold once more. Kicking around in the open air rubbish dump that passed for the town of Hor. When he was at the town of Hor, he walking thither and hither and kicking off the rubbish, he had developed a cold. And that cold came back once again. Though, if truth be told, it had never quite disappeared with my herbal tea. Even though he had taken one herbal tea, his cold couldn't go away. It was there. For the time being, the herbal tea helped him. But when he reached at Darchen, the cold came back into his body and he felt difficulty for staying there. One of my nostrils was blocked again. The expressible difficulty was he couldn't take breath freely. One of his nostrils was blocked. And when I lay down to sleep, I wasn't convinced that the other would provide me with the sufficient oxygen. As his one nostril was blocked, when he went to lay down, he was not confident that the other nostril will provide him the sufficient oxygen. My watch told me I was at 4,760 meters. Even though the highest mountain peak, that was around 5,500. They started coming down that mountain pass. Now, even though he was at the height of 4,760 meters from the sea level, it was not much higher than Ravu, and there I had been gasping for oxygen several times every night. Even though this town was not higher than that of Ravu, where he felt so much difficulty for breathing and all that, I had grown accustomed to these nocturnal disturbances by now. By now, he was practiced with this type of nocturnal disturbances, but they still scared me. But those nocturnal disturbances, the blockage in the nostrils that started disturbing him, that really started scaring him. He scared of this. Come to the next paragraph. Tired and hungry, I started breathing through my mouth. So no other option was there. So he started breathing through his mouth. After a while, I switched to single nostril power, which seemed to be admitting enough oxygen. Then he switched to single nostril power. One was already blocked. He started breathing with one nostril power, then which seemed to be admitting enough oxygen. But just as I was drifting off here means to fall asleep. Synonyms for drift off are dope off, dose off, or drop off, drowse off, flack out, nod off. All these are synonyms for drift off, which means fall asleep. So, just when he was drifting off, when he was falling asleep off, he woke up abruptly. But he couldn't do it. He woke up abruptly. Something was wrong. My chest felt. So he felt that something was wrong with him. And he felt that disturbance in his chest also. Come to the next. Felt strangely heavy and I sat up. Something was felt in his chest strangely heavy and he sat up. A movement that cleared my nasal passage. He woke up and he made a movement there. He walked a little to and fro. He walked a little to and fro. And instantly, the nasal passage opened. Almost instantly, and relieved the feeling in my chest. As he walked a little bit, his chest pain that relieved him. The disturbance that he felt at his chest, he got a relief. Then he thought, curious. He felt that it was curious. He couldn't place the reason for this disturbance in his chest. Then again, I lay back down and tried again for sleep. Once again, he went to his bed and wanted to go to sleep. But the result was the same. I was on the point of disappearing into the land of Nod. He couldn't go back to the land of Nod. Nod here means sleep. Be almost asleep. That is Nod. He couldn't go back to the land of sleep. In the world of sleep, that he couldn't move back. When something told me not to, something whispered in his mind not to do that, not to go to sleep, he couldn't go the natural sleep. He woke up. It must have been those emergency electrical impulses again. Some electrical impulses did not allow him to sleep. But this was not the same as on previous occasions. But the disturbances he felt now are not like the disturbances that he felt earlier. I was simply not allowed to go to sleep. This time I was not gasping for breath. This time the difficulty was not only for breathing, but I was simply not allowed to go to sleep. The disturbances did not allow him to go for a sleep. He couldn't take a natural sleep at Darchan. Again, sitting up once more immediately made me feel better. As he lay down, the same result. He couldn't sleep. He sat down. Then he felt a little better. I could breathe freely and my chest felt fine. When he sat down, he could breathe freely and he also felt his chest. It is good. But as soon as I lay down, my sinuses filled and my chest was odd. As soon as he fell down, his sinuses filled with something and his chest was odd. He couldn't feel better. I tried propping myself upright against the wall. Then he tried to prop up against the wall. But Now I couldn't manage to relax enough to drop off. Drop off here means to sleep. But whatever thing that he tried, he could not manage to relax. Relax enough to drop off. Relax enough to take his sleep. I could not put my finger on the reason, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't sleep. He could not come to a conclusion, a reason for his sleeplessness. But I was afraid to go sleep. Anyhow, he recognized that a scare, a fear in his mind that could not allow him to go to sleep. A little voice inside me was saying that if I did, I might never wake up again. This is the reason why he does not go to sleep. A secret voice in his mind, in his soul, always telling him that if he goes to sleep, he will not wake up in the next morning. That feeling that started haunting him the entire night. So I stayed awake all night. So the entire night he woke up. He could not sleep. He woke up and spent the entire night there. Satan took me to the Darchan Medical College the following morning. The next day morning, when he met Satan, he took him to the Darchan Medical College. The medical college at Darchan was new and looked like a monastery from the outside, with a very solid door that led into a large courtyard. Then Middleton gave a clear picture of the Darchan Medical College with its solid door, and when he entered there, it looked like a monastery with a large courtyard there. We found the consulting room, which was dark and cold and occupied by a Tibetan doctor. Finally, they found the consulting room, which was dark and cold. It was occupied by only one doctor, a Tibetan doctor, who wore none of the paraphernalia. Paraphernalia here means the equipments. He had no such equipments of a doctor that I had been expecting. What Middleton expected from a doctor, he couldn't see any such equipment in the Tibetan doctor's room. No white coat. He looked like any other Tibetan with a thick pullover. Pullover here means a coat, a woolen coat. And a woolly hat, a woolen coat and a woolly hat. When I explained my sleepless symptoms and my sudden aversion to lying down, aversion means dislike. His aversion to lying down, he shot me a few questions. Immediately, the Tibetan doctor asked him, raised a few questions to find out the reason, while feeling the vein of my wrist. Meanwhile, he sensed the pulse of the right arm. It's a cold, he said finally through Satan. Finally, he told Satan, the Tibetan driver, that he had a cold and the effect of altitude. I will give you something for it. This was the cause of his sleeplessness, a cold and the effect of altitude. He was now more than 4 kilometers above the sea level. So he had badly affected by that altitude. So he promised him a packet of medicine. I asked him if he thought I would recover enough to be able to do the Korah. Oh, yes, he said, you will be fine. When Middleton asked the daughter whether he would be ready for his rest of the journey, the doctor gave him confidence that it would be all right after consuming the medicine. I walked out of the medical college clutching a brown envelope. The doctor gave him a brown envelope of medicine. He was clutching means handling it, and stuffed with 15 screws of paper. Around 15 screws of paper in it. I had a 5-day course of Tibetan medicine. So he got a 5-day course of Tibetan medicine, which I started right away. As he left the hospital, he started the course, the first course he had taken. I opened an after breakfast package and found it contained a brown powder. He, after taking the breakfast, took the first course of medicine. It contained a brown powder that I had to take with hot water. This brown powder is supposed to take with hot water. It tasted just like cinnamon. The taste of that powder, something like cinnamon, he says. The contents of the lunchtime and bedtime packages were less obviously identifiable. The packages for after lunch and dinner, that is very difficult to find out what in it, were less obviously identifiable, which means very difficult to identify what medicines are they. Both contained small spherical brown pellets. Pellets means tablets. In the afternoon and night packages contained small spherical brown pellets. They looked suspiciously like sheep dung. This is with a fun, Middleton says. Those pellets, those tablets, just like sheep dungs, the black round sheep dung. But of course, I took them. But he had to consume it. Here in this part of the lesson, Middleton very humorously says this, that the pellet he got from the medical college at Durchan, they look like the sheep dung, and he is forced to eat it because no other way before him. It tells us a truth of our life, that is, it is the condition of our life that determines what we have to do, what we have to eat, and how we have to behave. Once he comes down from his normal health, he is forced to eat whatever that he gets from there. This is life. Now let us go back to the textbook. That night, after my first full day's course, I slept very soundly. Anyhow, that night, after taking the full course of a day, he could sleep very soundly, like a log, not a dead man. He funnily comments here that, like a log, he went to sleep, not like a dead man. The second part of the lesson we can conclude here. If you want to follow this channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon. And if you like the video, please give a thumbs up and share the video with your friends. Thank you. Thank you for watching till the end.